Welcome back, everyone, to another segment of Rabbi Jeff's Pirkei Avos Shiur, where we attempt to understand the meaning behind the instructions of our sages and how it's relevant to our lives today. We do this, of course, using the thoughts of our teachers before us and try to make them applicable to our times. Feel free, please, to contact me with any comments or questions at rjfromlj@aol.com. Today's Mishnah is Perek Aleph, Mishna Daled, Chapter 1, Mishnah 4, Part 1. Ish Tzreida v'Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim. So Yossi the son of Yoezer, a man of Tzreida, and Yossi the son of Yochanan, a man of Yerushalayim, Kiblu Mehem, received from them. Yossi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida Omer. So we tell over the one of the two rabbis what they said. He said, Yibescha beizvad chachamim, your house should be an opening, a place that is open, the gathering place for the sages. Ve'avi misabik b'af ragleim, and you should sit in the dust of their feet. Ve'avi shoyse b'tzamo es divreim, and you should drink thirstily their words. Now, again, Levi has been pointing out it's threes, okay, which is obviously very important. What these threes are is very important, but I think that the context of this Mishnah really has to be discussed long before we discuss the content of the Mishnah. The first thing that needs to be pointed out is that up until now, meaning for the first three Mishnayos, the first Mishnah we had men of the Great Assembly, the second Mishnah we had Antignos, Shimon HaTzadik, then we had Antignos Ish Socho, and now we're into the two Yosis. So there's a change, a historical change that's taking place here, which is called the Zugos, the pairs, that up until now, the leadership of the Jewish people was, thank you very much, the leadership of the Jewish people was one person, was really the Kohen Gadol, was the high priest, and he contained really everything, both the political and religious leadership of the Jewish people. That started to wane, plus the fact that we're reaching towards Hanukkah now. Historically, we're reaching towards Hanukkah. And that by the time that Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan finished their reign, so then Antiochus, the wicked Antiochus of the story of Hanukkah, he enters into the picture. So we're nearing the years, which pre-Hellenistic times, we're nearing towards the time of Hanukkah. And because of that, what was happening is that the high priesthood was being bought. It wasn't going to people that were necessarily priests, that were necessarily Kohanim, or necessarily worthy of being Kohanim. And because of that, they brought somebody else in to help lead the Jewish people, and that was the Nasi. We now changed to a period of time where there were two leaders for the Jewish people, where there was a Nasi and there was an Av Beis Din. It's the period of history is called the period of Zugos. They are really technically Tanoim, but nevertheless, we call this period of time the period of Zugos. There are 5 Zugos that are taught to us in Pirkei Avos, and the next 10 Mishnayos are all going to deal with the Zugos, with things that were said by the Zugos. The Zugos were balances to each other. One was the Nasi. The first of the two was always the Nasi. The second of the two was the Av Beis Din, was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the functional head of the Sanhedrin. One of them spoke out of Ava, out of love. One of them spoke out of Yira, which I'll try to point out as we go through the Mishnayos. And that it's fascinating that we see that Antignos, as we pointed out last week, spoke both messages. He spoke the message of Ava, and he spoke the message of Yira, the message of love and the message of awe. Now, things became diffused, and this is just a microcosm of what was going on in the Jewish people. The Jewish people themselves were becoming diffused. The Jewish people themselves were starting to weaken, and therefore, in the leadership, they were also starting to weaken to the extent that they now each needed to take a bailiwick. One had the bailiwick, so to speak, of Ava, of love, and one had the bailiwick of Yira, of awe, and that they had to split into really like two camps in order to be able to present a total picture of Judaism. And we can understand, and this is what I think is very important, for me it's very important, when I learn Mishnayos, I knew this and forgot it when I learned the Gemara 2 days ago. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But that understanding the context of where things come from changed them completely and puts them in a totally different light, and it gives us a whole nother message. So let's understand the context of time that was going on here. So one of the things that we have to understand is that what was taking place is that there were rules that were starting to be made against the learning of Torah. When we talk about that in the context of Hanukkah, it's not just in the time of Hanukkah. It was in the time leading up to Hanukkah that Torah was already taking a hit. Because of Hellenism, because of the desire to acculturate people into a foreign culture in order to be able to make one culture of the nation, so people were afraid to learn Torah. They were afraid to associate with Talmidei Chachamim. They were inviting Hellenists into their home in order to be able to convince the Greeks that they were okay. Plus, they were running these like parlor meetings. They would invite a bunch of their friends into the house. They would have a bunch of Greek philosophers in their house, and they would hope that would influence the people in their thinking, and it would send a message back to the Greek leadership that we're on board. We're getting into this. We're the good guys. They were also leaving Eretz Yisrael en masse because there were many people that were afraid of these gezeros, they were afraid of these decrees, and therefore they felt that the best way to deal with it is to actually pick up and leave. And therefore they went to the lands outside of the land of Israel. They lived at a time that the Maccabees, as we're going to see later, that bore the Maccabees, and therefore there were wars that were already beginning during this time of the Yossis. And those battles, there were certain people that were very afraid to fight those battles. There was a group of people called the Essenes, who many people say became the later Christians. But the Essenes were a splinter group that were petrified of becoming tamei, of becoming impure. Because if they became impure, they wouldn't be able to come to the temple. So what they did is that they would live with these incredible levels of impurity. And they refused to fight the battles because they were afraid that they would come into contact with soldiers. They were afraid to be the support teams. They were afraid even to help in the background, to pack packs, to go and to get food for them and to take care of the soldiers, to do even menial tasks, not necessarily fight to the front lines, because they were afraid of coming into contact with soldiers. And if a soldier had come into contact with a dead soldier, so then he would be tamei meis, he would be impure on the level of touching a dead body, which, as we learned in the Gemara and Shabbos, and we learned from the Torah, is on a very, very high level of impurity. They were afraid of contracting that tumah, and therefore they refused to participate in the wars. So now you have to take a look very carefully. I'm going to start off this Mishnah first. The Yossis, the two Yossis, we just learned in the Gemara, in Daf Yomi, that there were 18 decrees that were made. And in one of the decrees, a few of the decrees, we had a question of exactly when that decree was made. And as it turns out, the beginning of the decree was made in the time of the Yossis, which was much earlier than what the Gemara was talking about. Which decrees? One of the decrees was that they were gozer. They made a decree that anything that came from a foreign land outside the land of Israel, anything that came from Syria, or anything that came from from Bavel, from Babylon, one of the Arabic lands, anything that came from there caused tumah, caused impurity. And that the tumas hameis, that a person who himself was tamei because he touched the dead body, cannot make another person tamei merely by touching that person. When I learned those laws, I said, okay, the Yossis, like I learned it historically, I learned the Gemara said that it was the Yossis that said that. Great, everything was fine, moved on. And then I went over the Mishnah in preparation for today, and I said, oh no, it makes perfect sense that the Yossis would have made that. Because the Yossis were trying to keep people away from running out of Eretz Yisrael. That's not the way to deal with your problem, because the Syrians are giving us a hard time and they're telling us to get away from Torah. Don't run away. Don't go outside of Eretz Yisrael. Don't leave the holiness of the land. It was a Beis HaMikdash at the time. No, so therefore they put a fence on the border of Eretz Yisrael. What was the fence? Step outside and you become tamei. And then they turned to the Essenes, to this group of people, and said, we need your help. You're not soldiers, but at least you could be helping us. And they said, no, we're not helping. We're not helping because we're afraid that we're going to become tamei. So they made a rabbinical decree that when you touch another person who is tamei meis, you're not going to be tamei. And therefore, those laws were made in the context of the history that was going on in the time. As was this Mishnah. Yossi ben Yoezer turns to his people and he says to them, you have Syrian Greeks in your house, you have Hellenists in your house, you have all kinds of philosophers that you're trying to show, look who we are. You don't understand that you're tearing away at the very fabric of Judaism. Who needs to be in your house? It's the Chachamim, it's the Torah scholars that need to be in your house. And it's not just them that actually need to be sitting in your house, but it has to be a base of Vad the Chachamim. Your house has to be a house that is conducive, that if a Rav was going to walk into your house, that if a Talmid Chacham would walk into your house, you wouldn't be embarrassed. You know, he walks into the house, he sees Svarim, he sees Jewish books, he sees Jewish artifacts, he feels a whole an aura of Torah inside the house. That was the first message that he said, based on what was going on in the times. And then he turns to them and says, "Vehevi misavik ba'afar ragleim." You guys are sitting in the dust of philosophers. You're going nuts over Greek philosophy. You're going nuts over ideology, over intellectual thoughts and thinking about and pondering life's questions. Do it in Torah. Have you misavik ba'afar ragleim? Sit in the dust of the feet of the rabbis. You have yishaisa b'tzames divrayim. You're applying your thirst to the wrong places. You're applying your thirst to secular knowledge. You're applying your thirst to Greek knowledge. Apply your thirst to the thirst of Torah. And therefore, what Yossi ben Yoezer was talking to, he was talking to his generation. Without explaining all this, which I will next, but without even going into any details, he was turning to his nation and was saying to his nation that if you're going to attack knowledge and intellectual knowledge with something, do it to Torah. If you're going to pour your energy into something, do it to Torah. If you're going to open your house to Torah, because that was exactly what was happening in his generation. It was starting to crack. People were running away. People were moving on to other things. They were trying to find their answers in other religions and in other philosophies rather than looking within inside Judaism. You know, it was an amazing thing. In the 70s and the 80s, there was a proliferation of cults. And, you know, if you looked carefully at the cults, so a lot of the names, you know, granted, Sung Young Moon was at the head of one of them, but all of the lieutenants, Goldberg, Schwartz, Cohen, you know, Lily Yidlach, they were all Jewish kids. In India at the time, there were probably more people sitting in ashrams in India that were Yidden than were the non-Jews. You know, they told her a great story that there was a woman that went to a travel agent, said to a travel agent, "I need to go see my guru." So the travel agent says, you know, he asks her what town. She tells him a town in India. He says to her, "You don't understand. You have to fly to India, and then from India you have to take another flight, and then you have to take a 3-day bus ride, and then you have to take a 4-day camel trip up a mountain. Then you have to climb up the last couple of 100 feet, and then you'll get to your guru. You're an old lady. It's going to be hard for you." She says, "I don't care. I should go see my guru." So, okay. Books her a flight, she flies, she takes a second flight, she takes the bus ride, she takes the camel ride, she climbs up the top of the mountain, she gets to the top of the mountain, says, I should see my guru. So they tell her, "I'm sorry, but the guru is not seeing anyone. For 6 months, you have to sit and wait." So she sits there and she waits for 6 months until finally one day, guy walks out from the curtain and he says, "The guru can see you now." She walks into the guru, the gate opens, she walks into the guru, she walks over to him, she grabs his ear and she says to him, "Myron, when are you coming home?" Now, that is, there were many Yidden. There were many Jews that were involved in these cults, that were involved in all of this kind of stuff. Why? Because as far as they were concerned, there was nothing in Judaism that held them in, because Judaism didn't speak their language. There was no, you know, these languages were languages of love. They never heard the word love in Judaism. You know, it was fire and brimstone. I remember the rabbi that I grew up with wrote a book of his sermons, and he titled the book Fire and Brimstone. And he would write, because there was nothing that came out of his mouth that wasn't fire and brimstone. When he said good Shabbos, it was like fire and brimstone. And it was just That was the Judaism that people had. Again, they tell the cute story of a kid who was once sitting in shul, and he sees the memorial plaques, so, the yard side plaques next to him. And all of a sudden, the kid's reading the yard side plaques, and all of a sudden, you see his face turns in panic. And he sees a plaque that says, whatever, Bob Goldberg, in memory of Bob Goldberg, who died in service. And he's in panic. The Rav walks by and he turns to the Rav and he says, which one, Shacharis or Mincha? And that's the kind of aura that people grew up with this fear, not with the sense of love, not with the sense of beauty. And in the time of the Hellenists, people were looking for something else because they felt that inside of Judaism, inside of Torah, none of that existed. They didn't hear the message of love, and they didn't hear the message of acceptance, and they didn't hear the message of spirituality. It was a defined halachic message. The Essenes were an outgrowth of what was going on in the time. That the Essenes, who took it to an extreme, but people were worried about impurity, purity, worried about all the details and the minutiae, and they were missing the heart of it. They were missing the joy and the beauty of it. And that's what Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer was trying to bring back to the people. He was saying, first of all, your house has to be a Beis Vada Chachamim. There has to be an aura that's conducive to the Chachamim in your house. There has to be this avik. You have to want to sit in the dust of their feet, and you have to have a thirst for learning Torah. You have to feel like you're missing something. You have to feel so desirous of learning Torah. He was trying to put back that sense of fire back into the Jewish people. Now, we need to understand a few other little things here. One is that in the time of the two Yosis, the first machlokes arose in the Jewish people. The machlokes was inconsequential, well, it was consequential, but relatively inconsequential in the bigger scheme of things, nothing practical in our daily terms. They argued about a korban, about a sacrifice, whether you needed to put your hands on the head of a sacrifice and lean down, whether you could do that on Yom Tov or not do that on Yom Tov. Relatively immaterial, but nevertheless, the reason why it was a massive machlokes is because it was the first machlokes in Klal Yisrael. When we say that the Syrian Greeks tried to darken the eyes of the Jewish people, by the choshchu eineihem b'Torah, that they were successful. They were successful. We won the war, but there were battles that we lost, and one of the battles that we lost is that they in fact were successful in darkening our eyes. And for that reason, there was the first machlokes. The first machlokes was just an outgrowth, an indication of what was actually going on in that time, that there was a lack of clarity. We say that when the two Yosis die, the Talmud says that they were known as eshkolot. What's an eshkol? It's a cluster. Well, in Talmudic terms, an eshkol is ish shekol bo, eshkol, somebody who has everything, somebody who has street smarts, somebody who has Torah smarts, somebody who understands the way the world works, the way the Torah works, somebody who understands the entire Torah. It's called an eshkol. The two Yosis were eshkolos. They were the last of the eshkolos. They say about Yossi, about Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer, that he learned Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu. So everybody, what do you mean Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu learned everything. When Moshe Rabbeinu died, there were 3,000 halachas that were lost. 3,000. So he couldn't have learned Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu because he didn't have those 3,000 halachas. So the Talmud says that he learned like Moshe. In other words, just like Moshe Rabbeinu learned everything, he also learned everything. He was able to hold onto and retain, like Moshe Rabbeinu did. He was able to hold onto and retain everything. This was the giant of what Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan, these are the giants that they were. And they were trying now to hold on to a generation that was splitting and splintering a Jewish people, that was literally, the rug was being pulled out from underneath it, and that's who they were speaking to. Tomorrow, when I go into greater detail into this Mishnah, that will come alive even more. But now we have at least the concept. Last thing I want to talk about today is I want to talk about the death of Yossi ben Yoezer, because it presents to us an extremely important idea and concept. That even in his death, he had something to teach us, Yossi ben Yoezer. That Yossi ben Yoezer had a nephew by the name of Yokim Ish Tsuros, who was a Kohen Gadol, who was known as alchemist, and he was misyaving. He had become a Hellenist. In his great wickedness, he made he killed a tremendous amount of rabbis and a tremendous amount of Jews, but he had mercy on his uncle. And when he brought his uncle out to death, he brought him out on a crucifix, which itself is a historical fascination. But he brought him on a crucifix. The Gemara talks about how the Medrash talks about how he came out on a piece of wood, on a plank of wood. So there are those that learned that was the first of the crucifixes. So they bring him out, and they were going to kill him. And he says to him and he was riding on a horse, and it was on Shabbos. And he says to him that you're maybe it's time for you to change. And he looks at his uncle and he says to his uncle that look at the horse that my master puts me on, and look at the horse that your master puts you on. In other words, you're going out on a crucifix to be killed, and I am riding on a horse. I'm the leader. I'm on the good side. I'm on the leadership side. So Omer Lo, he said to him, Im kach lemachisov kal v'chomer le'osei ritzono. So he said back to Yochim, he said, if this is what happens to the people that get him angry, then kal v'chomer to the people that do his will. So Omer Lo Yochim, so Yochim said to him, Ha'im asa adam ritzono yosem imcha? He says, is there anybody in the world that has done his will more than you? So Omer Lo v'im kach, then if that's the case, la'osei ritzono, if this is what God does to the people that do his will, kal v'chomer l'machisov, how much more so the people that anger him have to worry. Nichnesu bo hadavar ke'eres shel nachas, that it went into alchemists like poison from a snake, and it woke him up, and he realized the folly of his ways, and he immediately killed himself in a way. He jumped off a building onto a spike. He committed the 4 types of death that would normally be given by the court. He committed those on himself. And he died really cleansing his soul. And as his soul was ascending to the heavens, Yossi ben Yoezer heard a heavenly voice come out and say, Yesh kaina olamai b'shah achas, that you can acquire your world to come in 1 second. And then Yossi ben Yoezer was taken out and was killed. In that last breath, Yossi ben Yoezer taught us, along with his wicked, who died not wicked, nephew alchemists, that a person can turn their life around, yesh kaina olamai b'shah achas, in 1 second. We tend to think that it requires a long period of time and a slow process, when the truth is that that's for the actual change. But the decision for a person to change their life, the decision for a person to grab onto themselves and to do something with themselves, yesh kona olama b'shah achas, it can happen in 1 second. And as long as the ears are open, as long as a person is in the right place at the right time, and a person is listening to the things, the messages that are being sent to them, a person can acquire olam haba, the world to come. In other words, a change in their life can acquire it in 1 second. There are people that unfortunately you can shout right into their ears and they hear absolutely nothing. But there are others, and the Gemara brings many, many instances, many stories of yesh kona olam b'shah achas, which if I was talking about that subject, it's very inspiring, the different stories that we know, that the person who was going to kill Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan, the executioner, he took Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan as one of the 10 martyred Jews, and he put the Sefer Torah, wrapped the Sefer Torah around him, and he burnt the Sefer Torah, and he burnt him inside of the Sefer Torah, and he put wool, wet wool, on his heart so that he shouldn't die fast. Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan was sitting there having a conversation with his students, and his students said to him, Rebbe, what do you see? He said, I see the parchment is burning, but the osios parchos ba'over, but the letters are flying up to the heavens. Because you can destroy the outer trappings, but you can't destroy the soul. You can't destroy the essence of the Torah. And therefore the letters were flying up. His executioner, his student said to him, Rabbi, open your mouth so that you can die quicker. And he said, no, I can't bring this on any faster. His executioner said, if I take the sponges off your heart, so then, then will that be okay? So he took the sponges off his heart, and then he jumped into the fire with him, and he died also. And again, the heavenly voice came out and said, Yesh kaina olam b'sha'ah achas, a person can change his entire ways in 1 second. Famous story of Elazar ben Durdaya, who was a person who had used, he's called Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. Rabbi said nothing in all of Shas. If you look all over him, you won't find him. You find one story. What was the story? He was a guy who loved prostitutes. And he went and he spent money on prostitutes. He spent every last penny he had. He found a certain prostitute in a faraway place. He traveled to get to that prostitute. When he was with the prostitute, she said something obnoxious to him, and it woke him up and it made him realize, oh my gosh, what am I doing? He had an epiphany. And he went and he cried himself into tshuva and cried himself to death. And again, we say about him, Yeshkona olama b'sha'achas, sometimes it's just one epiphany, one awakening that could change a person. Yossi ben Yoezer turns to his people and he says to them, look, I understand you're having a hard time. I understand that you're not inspired. But you're not going to be inspired by staying away from inspiration. Put yourself into a place that you could be kaina olama b'sha'achas. Put yourself into a place where your life can change in 1 second. How's that going to happen? Surround yourself with rabbis. Sit at least in the dust of their feet. Again, it could be totally uninspirational for you, but they're going to say one thing, one word is going to come out of them, and you're going to say to yourself, oh, should I V8? You're going to say to yourself, oh my God, that's amazing. How can I ignore that? And then, if you approach it with the right kind of approach, the approach of tzamach, the approach of thirst, so then you might be able to find that moment of epiphany. You might be able to find that moment of being turned on. This Mishnah was very much a reflection of who Yossi ben Yoezer was. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss what are the 3 things that Yossi ben Yoezer was really asking us to do. What is the connection between those 3, and what was the message, the deeper message of Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer?
Perek Aleph, today's Mishnah,